If you're the quiet one who never really felt like you fit in, you might be freaked out by just how relatable this video is going to be. Because most people don't realize that they have childhood trauma. Because they think that it's supposed to be this loud and obvious thing. When in most cases, it just shows up as undetectable behaviors that you've normalized as just who you are. So in this video, I'll walk you through 5 oddly specific signs that you carry early emotional trauma, even if you don't remember much from childhood. What could have caused them, and practical ways to heal and find your voice. I've seen all of this in myself and countless of other quiet overthinkers as well. So this first sign is possibly the most revealing sign of childhood trauma, and it's one that most people completely miss. If I ask you, do you ever get angry? And your first response is, no, I never get angry. I'm just not an angry person. My alarm bells immediately start ringing. So let me tell you a story to explain why. So I once had a client named Joan. Now Joan was this incredibly gentle person, soft-spoken, so kind, and so considerate to the point that I'm sure she would have apologized if her breathing was too loud. Now we talked about her childhood, and she said, oh yeah, my dad would hit us a lot as children. It was so terrifying to be at home. We couldn't make any noise. Once he could hear us laughing, and that upset him so much that it ended up being one of the worst beatings that we've ever gotten. But it's not really his fault. I don't really think he wanted to be a parent. Did you catch that? Joan just described horrific abuse, then immediately excused her abuser. No anger, just empathy towards the person who terrorized her childhood. Fast forward to her adult life, her boss regularly takes credit for her work, her partner talks down to her, her friends constantly cancel plans last minute and borrows money that they never really pay back. How does she respond? Not with being angry at being mistreated, but with thoughts like, oh, maybe I'm just asking for too much. I must have done something wrong to upset them. When you say things like, I'm just not an angry person, what you're really saying is, I learned early that anger was dangerous. So you don't believe that your abuse is real or relevant. I'm sure even now you're probably saying that, oh yeah, my childhood wasn't as bad as that. Other people had it much worse. And guess what? Even Joan said the same thing. But what matters is how you felt emotionally, not comparing the specifics of the physical things that happened. When you grow up in a volatile home without consistent love and safety, you quickly learn that which emotions might get you hurt or rejected. And anger is usually the first to go because of how disruptive it can be and how it can evoke harm from the people around you. It took me many years of painful relationships to discover 2 crucial things about anger. Number 1, you know how you feel when you learn of a story where a child or an animal gets abused or neglected? That feeling? That's what anger is. Anger is the feeling that looks out for people. And anger is supposed to be your internal protector. It's this emotion that says, this isn't okay when someone mistreats you. It's not a feeling to demonize. Number 2, feeling anger and acting out your anger are 2 completely different things. So let me explain. You know those game shows where people are blindfolded and have to put their hand into a box to guess what's inside? And they get so freaked out, even sometimes angry about what they're being subjected to, but it's actually just maybe a ball of cotton or maybe even a hamster inside. If you don't know something, when you encounter it, it'll freak you out and completely engulf you. But if you know it, you can handle it with grace. It's the same thing with anger. People who fly into rages actually don't acknowledge their anger or understand where it comes from. So when that overwhelming feeling arrives, they feel entitled to unleash it onto others, believing, you made me feel this way, so you deserve my reaction. You put this weird little thing in the box. Those who have done the work to understand their anger, they feel it rising, they recognize it as information, and can respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. It might not feel comfortable. It might still feel a bit overwhelming, but you don't feel entitled to taking out others. Yet because of what we witnessed growing up, we thought that feeling your anger and acting out your anger is basically the same thing. So if you're someone who says, I don't get angry, you're probably sitting with an unidentified emotion that's actually trying to protect you. And just like the person afraid to put their hand in the mystery box, you're avoiding something that could actually be helpful once you understand it. So now the question becomes, how do you begin to reconnect with this protective emotion that you've buried for so long? Try this. Think of someone that you deeply love. A child, a nephew, niece, sibling, friend, even a pet. Now imagine them experiencing what you went through in childhood. Do you feel that surge of protectiveness that's rising in your chest? That's healthy anger, and that's what you deserve to feel for yourself. You don't need to confront your parents or lash out at anyone. This is all about recognizing when your boundaries are crossed and honoring that feeling that rises within. When you can acknowledge your anger without being controlled by it, you'll naturally start setting healthier boundaries. You'll stop finding yourself in situations where people continuously take advantage of you. And trust me, once you've reconnected with this part of yourself, you won't need a script on what to say when someone disrespects you. You'll just know. Now let's move on to the second oddly specific sign of childhood trauma. When I ask you, what do you like about yourself? And your answers are along the lines of, oh, I'm kind, I'm helpful, I'm considerate, I'm reliable, my alarm bells start going off again. Let me show you what I mean. Think about someone you love deeply in your life right now. Now, tell me, what do you love about them? Sure, you might start with, they're kind or they're always there for me. But if you keep going, you'll probably start saying things like, oh, I love how their face lights up when they laugh. Or I love how passionate they are about their quirky hobby. Or I love how they see the world so differently than everybody else. Do you notice how most of the things that you truly love about them have nothing to do with what they do for you? You love qualities about who they are as people, but you don't extend that same love towards yourself. Instead, you just tell me that the only thing that you value about yourself is how convenient you are to other people. So I had a client, let's call her Nira, who came to me because she couldn't understand why she kept attracting partners who took advantage of her generosity. And when I asked what she liked about herself, her answer was the same familiar tone that I've heard in so many other people. I'm responsible, I'm hardworking, I'm kind, I'm always there when people need me. Not one quality that wasn't somehow serving other people. And when we dug into her childhood, it became clear. Her mother had severe depression, and from the age of 5 or 6, she became the family caretaker. She'd make her mother tea, remind her to eat, even call her grandparents when things got really bad. Her father's love came with a lot of conditions as well. Straight A's meant praise and attention, but anything less meant disappointment and distance. So she never learned that she was lovable just for existing. She learned that her worth was tied to what she could provide. And this creates a devastating cycle in adulthood. You attract people who value you for what you can do for them rather than who you are. You overextend yourself, you burn out, your friendships never go deep because people don't see you beyond this nice and helpful person. Relationships stay flat and on the surface. And office politics becomes extremely stressful to you as you need to make sure that you're useful to everyone. And worst of all, you have no idea who you are beyond your usefulness. When you grow up believing that love is conditional, that you need to earn good grades, behave perfectly, and help out with everything in order for your parents to be proud of you, to love you, or even just to be in a good mood, you internalize this belief that you're only lovable when you're doing something for others. So how do you begin to break this pattern? If I asked you to write a list of qualities about yourself that have nothing to do with helping people, you'll probably struggle to see what's so special about them. So instead of that, I'd like you to ask the people who love you what their favorite qualities about you are. Ask specifically about your personality traits or the unique things that you do or say that make you you. You need to borrow other people's reality of you until you can see it for yourself. You need to hear that they love the way that you get excited about small things, or how deeply you think about the world, or your terrible puns that make everyone groan but secretly smile. And why might not feel impactful at first, the more you work on yourself and reflect on those traits, you'll start to see what it means to like yourself beyond your helpfulness. And for Nira, she started appreciating how organized she is, how attentive she is when it comes to emotions in herself and others, how much she loves to cook and try different cuisines, even if she doesn't feel like she was the best cook. She learned how to recognize parts of herself and actually enjoy those qualities in her. She had no idea that it was even possible to love herself this way. Now let's move on to the third sign. One that often gets mistaken for just being introverted. If you almost always spend your break times at work alone, politely decline invitations to go out, or keep to yourself even when you are in a group setting, I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to explain. I call this considerate self-isolation. Why considerate? Because you're not just isolating for yourself. You're doing it because you genuinely believe that you're doing others a favor by staying away. I had a client named Sarah who was great at her job, meticulous, creative, but every lunch break, she'd sit alone at her desk or find a quiet corner in the cafeteria. When her colleagues invited her to happy hour, she'd always have a polite reason as to why she couldn't make it. She told me that she just wasn't a social person, that she prefers being alone. But as we worked together, the truth actually came out. It wasn't that she preferred being alone, it's that being around others filled her with overwhelming anxiety. Because deep down, she believed that she was fundamentally an inconvenience to everyone around her. That she was boring, weird, not fun, that she'd inevitably say the wrong thing and make everyone uncomfortable. And even when people repeatedly invited her out, she was convinced that it was out of pity or obligation, not because they genuinely wanted her company. Does this sound familiar? This pattern typically stems from growing up in a household that was either overly critical of you or where you never really received guidance on how to form healthy relationships and navigate social situations. When parents constantly criticize how you speak, what you say, or how you act around others, or worse, mock you for social missteps, you internalize the belief that something about you is fundamentally unacceptable to others. Alternatively, it can also happen if your parents were emotionally distant and you never got to observe and absorb the intuitive social skill that most children learn through modeling their parents. Either way, you grew up being the odd one out. You overthink everything, you're convinced that you're going to say the wrong thing, and you don't intuitively understand how to interact with others. This creates a devastating snowball effect as you get older. So you feel poorly about yourself, you don't know how to interact naturally, people sense your discomfort and might keep their distance, and with each awkward interaction, you gather more evidence that confirms your belief that something is wrong with you. Eventually, you decide that you're just not a social person and that people just don't like you. Now, here's where most advice gets it completely wrong. People will tell you to just put yourself out there and practice more socializing until it just feels comfortable. But from my own experience, forcing yourself to socialize more actually worsens everything. It intensifies your anxiety, causing you to freeze up or overcompensate in the moment, which leads to obsessive overthinking afterwards, and then ultimately adds another painful memory to add to your list of proof that something is wrong with you. So what actually works? The biggest shift for me wasn't socializing more. It was learning to observe people more deeply and relate them back to myself. Start paying attention in the small details in the people around you. For example, I noticed my colleague got just as excited as I did about an episode of an obscure TV show that I loved. The manager that I thought was completely different from me turned out to be a night owl who also struggled with morning meetings. I've had a client who noticed how their marketing director would light up talking about their garden the same way that she would get animated discussing books. How the quiet guy in accounting had the same sense of dry humor that they have, just expressed in smaller doses. They even noticed shared stressors. How the seemingly put-together team lead would get that same overwhelmed look that they recognized in themselves when deadlines piled up. Or how she'd fidget with her coffee cup when someone interrupted her train of thought, just like them. These observations did something profound. We realized that underneath all of the surface differences, we share so many of these tiny threads of commonality. When you think you're inherently annoying or broken, you unintentionally put everyone else on a pedestal. You assume that all the things that you don't know about them are better than you by default. But when you start to recognize that everyone has their own anxieties, social quirks, and habits, they don't seem so mysterious anymore. You're filling in all the gaps that you used to assume that were better than you with much more relatable qualities. And when you do this long enough, you'll start to realize that no one is better than you. There are people who are healthier in some aspects, unhealthy in others. It's a much more balanced view of people that calms your anxieties immensely. So instead of forcing yourself into more social situations, learn how to be a social observer. Look for the small threads that connect you to other people, along with the differences that you can appreciate. Let's move on to the fourth sign. Something that is so normalized in our society that most people miss it completely. I call it everyday addictions. You know that friend who's always working, sending emails at midnight, taking calls on weekends, their entire identity completely wrapped up in their job? Maybe you know someone who can't go 10 minutes without music playing. Maybe it's you who can't fall asleep without a podcast playing. Or you consume self-help content every spare moment of your day. Or you exercise until your body aches, telling yourself that this is just about being healthy. These don't look like addictions from the outside. In fact, we celebrate so many of them. People tell us that, oh, we're so dedicated to our career. Oh, you're so passionate about personal growth. Oh, this person's just so disciplined about her fitness routine. I had a client named Anya who came to me for help with social anxiety because she was feeling stuck in her career. On the surface, she was a competent professional who just needed some confidence. But there was something else going on. She explained that she listens to podcasts or music pretty much whenever possible, while commuting, working, cooking, exercising, even falling asleep. And she told me that it helps her relax and makes her grow. So I asked her, okay, what happens if you don't listen to music or a podcast? Say her phone dies and maybe she has to travel back home without it. She said, oh no, I'd feel awful. I'd feel really restless. That's why I always bring a portable charger around me, so this never happens. She was experiencing what so many of us experience, the profound discomfort of being alone with our thoughts and feelings. So here's what's actually happening. When you grew up in a volatile environment that constantly triggered your feelings of worthlessness, activated your fight or flight response, and never taught you how to process these overwhelming emotions, you develop a powerful coping mechanism: escape. You discover that certain activities allow you to focus intensely on something external, giving your brain a temporary break from the internal chaos. Work demands your full attention. Music fills the auditory space. Self-improvement books give you hope while occupying your mind. This doesn't mean that they're all unhealthy and you don't find actual enjoyment in them. It's more like as a result of finding enjoyment in them, your mind subconsciously makes it a coping mechanism as well. But the red flag isn't the activity itself. It's the relationship that you have with it. The panic that you feel when you can't do it. The emptiness that rushes in when you stop. For Anya, social anxiety wasn't just about worrying what other people thought. It was about what she thought of herself when there was nothing to drown out the voice of her own inner critic. Even sitting quietly with her own thoughts would manifest either as completely blanking out and dissociating, or elaborate fantasies about the future to avoid her feelings. So if this sounds familiar, let me share with you how to actually break the cycle without being completely overwhelmed by the feelings that you have been pushing out. So you start with your body, not your thoughts. Whenever there's tense emotions you're avoiding, it shows up in your body. Your chest tightens, jaws clench. These are physical cues that you're holding stressful thoughts. Pay attention throughout the day, and when you notice something, have a conversation with yourself. What am I feeling in my body right now? What just happened that caused this? And when have I ever felt this feeling before? Now, this isn't about solving those emotions. It's about learning how to use those periods of silence to have introspective conversations with yourself, all by using your physical reactions as the icebreaker. For Anya, she noticed that she would almost get like a tension headache whenever she felt like she was ignored or talked over in a group setting. And immediately once she gets time to herself, she would self-soothe by listening to something, or by diving straight into work. So we explored how she gets extremely triggered by feeling unseen, and uncovered that it came from the trauma of immigrating to a new country when she was just a young teen. A new culture, new environment, made her go from happy and expressive to soft-spoken and reserved. So whenever someone talked over her, her subconscious would play back every failed attempt at friendship, at fitting in, at being taken advantage of, at being made fun of. But after she started having those intimate conversations with herself about those physical stressors, next time someone talked over her, she knew how to have a conversation with herself, to self-soothe and be there for herself. So your everyday addictions aren't character flaws. They're survival mechanisms that helped you cope when you had no other tools. By acknowledging them with compassion rather than judgment, you take the first step towards healing the wounds that they've been protecting. For the fifth and final sign, now this might not resonate with everyone, but for those that it does, it can feel extremely revealing. You rarely look in a mirror, and when you do, you feel deeply uncomfortable. Now, I'm not talking about normal appearance insecurities that most people experience. This is something different. A strange disconnection, almost as if you're looking at a stranger. I once worked with a client who would do her makeup by focusing on individual features, a quick glance at her eyes while applying mascara, or a brief look at her lips for applying lipstick, but never actually taking her whole face at once. She'd position mirrors in her home at angles where she'd only catch partial reflections. When I shared that I had the same experience, I realized just how common this experience is among people who suffered from childhood trauma. So many of us thought that we were the only ones. This peculiar mirror avoidance often develops in childhood when your sense of self was fractured by criticism, neglect, or having to hide your feelings to survive. The mirror becomes a confrontation, a visual representation of all the wrongness that you feel inside. And what's actually happening here is your body and your brain developed a protective disconnection from yourself. If fully witnessing yourself meant facing unbearable feelings of shame and unworthiness or grief, your nervous system found a solution. Simply don't look. Over time, this created a fragmented self-image where parts of you remained unseen, even by yourself. Now, here's where most advice gets it wrong. You'll often hear that you should force yourself to look in the mirror. or even practice affirmations. But just like the forced socializations that we discussed earlier, this can actually intensify feelings of disconnection. Instead, you have to start internally. Exactly what we talked about in the earlier points. Begin recognizing and appreciating the deeper parts of who you already are, independent of how you look or what you can do for others. Maybe it's your sharp observational skills, your ability to empathize, or the resilience that carried you through some of your hardest moments in life. Identify these traits intentionally, one by one, until they genuinely feel valuable to you. Only as your internal connection strengthens will your physical reflection begin to feel less and less threatening. And that's when you can gently start pushing yourself to see your reflection. The goal isn't to suddenly start loving what you're looking at in the mirror. It's to simply repair your internal sense of safety first. So the reflection starts staring back, stops becoming a confrontation, and starts becoming more of a recognition of someone that you've already learned to trust. Now, if you notice any of these 5 signs in yourself, there's something critical you need to understand. Underlying all of these patterns is one emotion, a deep, visceral feeling that something about you is fundamentally wrong or unworthy. And that feeling has a name. It's called toxic shame. And it's the invisible force keeping these patterns locked in place no matter how hard you try to change them. And that's why I created this video called The Unexpected Antidote to Shame. Because until you address this core emotion, these patterns will keep repeating regardless of how many self-help books you read or how much you try to force yourself to change. In that video, I break down the completely counterintuitive approach that finally freed me from decades of feeling fundamentally broken. An approach that goes against everything you've probably been taught about healing. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.